Thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. First tonight, Chicago is stretched to the limit, housing asylum seekers as the city prepares for a changing of the guard.
We shouldn't have to come to this point, but here we are. And even in my final days as mayor, it's important for us to step up and respond to this burgeoning crisis.
Confusion, controversy, and a lack of coordination color the city's response to the influx of migrants arriving by the busload every day. Brandon Johnson mostly mum on the issue as he prepares to take over on Monday. Meanwhile, Johnson announces more key members of his administration.
I'd like to take this time to ask that everyone keeps this officer and all the responding officers that day in your prayers as they process the trauma they experienced.
4 teenagers charged with murder in the horrific slaying of Chicago police officer Ariana Preston, who was just days away from receiving her graduate degree. And in sports, the Blackhawks get a season ticket jolt after winning the Connor Bedard sweepstakes, landing the top pick in the NHL draft. Here to talk about all of that and more are Greg Hines of Crane's Chicago Business, our very own Heather Sharon of WTTW News, Laura Rodriguez-Preza of the Chicago Tribune, and Phil Thompson of the Chicago Tribune as well. Laura, let's start with the migrant situation. We've all seen the images in the last couple weeks, folks sleeping on the floors of police stations. What is the situation as we sit here tonight?
Well, it's desperate for them, right? It's no longer a story of when they'll be homed anywhere. It's really of how long they'll have to be homeless for, essentially, right? They're sleeping on floors. They don't have, there's really no protocol for them right now. And they are confused. They're confused as to what can they do next, because for so long, they were under the impression that someone was going to come and sort of guide them somewhere, and there's no one anymore.
It also seems like public officials, Greg Hines, are confused. The city is saying they're not coordinating with the state not coordinating with the city or the county. Who's in charge here?
Confused is a nice word.
Maybe there's another C word.
This is CYA at its best. You know, there's a problem in Washington where Biden doesn't seem to know what he wants to do on the border, but the Republicans aren't going to do anything. Springfield could come up with more money, but Lori Lightfoot should have been prepared. One of the best stories I heard all week is that there's $30 million in money waiting the city down in Springfield, right at a time when there's an emergency and we need the money, but after 2.5 months, they still haven't put in the paperwork to get the money, according to the state. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I hear going on. There's all kinds of blame here, but in the meantime, there's a real human tragedy. I go by a police station every night on my way back from the gym, and I've seen the same family with kids there for better than a week. Little 3-year-old running around. It's awful.
And Heather Sharon, I mean, there's been these makeshift shelters like the Standard Club downtown. The old Standard Club, I believe, is opened up. And then, of course, there's a controversy in South Shore where residents there are trying to fight against migrants coming to the shuttered South Shore High School. How's that situation going to be resolved?
Well, it's going to be really difficult because there are 2 things conspiring against helping these people. 1, a lack of money, and 2, a lack of adequate space. So we heard from Alderman Mike Rodriguez of the 22nd Ward that he has basically moved programming out of Petowski Park to move in migrants to house them, which is the kind of sort of solution that I think the city is now confronted with. But it is going to have a series of cascading effects, because then you're going to have classes that are moved and, you know, other people disrupted. So it is really going to take, I don't think there's any doubt, sort of a whole city approach to it. And as you said in the introduction, this is a transition weekend, right? The 56th mayor will give way to the 57th mayor, and this will be at the top of his to-do list, an ongoing humanitarian crisis in the nation's 3rd largest city.
And speaking of that, Philip Thompson, have you heard anything from Brandon Johnson about what his plan would be? I mean, I think he's spoken in vague terms, saying they want to listen to the community, but also take care of the folks coming here, but no specifics yet.
No, and I think it's something that he's particularly avoiding until he has to adopt it. Now, what I find interesting is I think he could look at a companion crisis going on in New York. You know, the same things are happening where migrants are being bussed up there. New York Mayor Eric Adams has been shipping migrants to Rockland and Orange counties in that state. Whether that's an option here, I think we've heard from suburbs here that they don't want that to happen, but maybe
Laura,
a
are you
recourse.
hearing anything about any kind of coordination
no.
with the county or the state?
No, so I think that's where the confusion is right now. That I don't, because of the transition, I don't think there's a really clear, anything cleared of how anything may work, whether it be within the city and with the state. So at least at the beginning of, in August, we heard of how families were being sent into the suburbs to the hotels. They had that protocol going on. That's not happening right now. So I'm unsure. It's unclear how the city and the state are working together to address this.
And then also there was that Sun-Times story today about the unused beds from the makeshift hospital that was built during COVID at McCormick Place. So can those beds just be used or transferred for migrants to sleep on?
Well, sure they can be used, but you have to have a place to use them. You can't put them out in the middle of the street, and that's the problem. When Mayor Lightfoot proposed using the empty South Shore High School, the neighborhood went up in arms, and they were, I have some thoughts about that, but one of the things they said.
Well, tell us your thoughts.
Well,
You're among friends here, Greg.
Well, I mean, the alderman from that place literally said, "We don't have any crisis here in my ward." I mean, that's awfully insensitive. On the other hand, the people there make the argument that, hey, all of a sudden you want to use this hospital to house homeless people. We have homeless people here. Why haven't you done anything? There's a lot of insensitivity around, and I think Mayor Johnson's going to have a really difficult line to walk here, because he's got the Latino community wants to go one way, the black community maybe wants to go another way, and he's got to really strike the right balance.
There are progressives that are black, white, and Latino, and you've got to set, they are your base. Heather Sharon, do you know anything about any kind of specific plan he plans to roll out?
I don't, and he did not sort of endorse or reject plans to house the immigrants at South Shore High School. He said, again, he wants to collaborate, he wants to bring everybody to the table, and really sort of, I think there's a lot of sort of very sad and terrible things about this situation. Perhaps the saddest is the, increase in tension between Chicago's black community and Chicago's Latino community, because it's this sort of notion that there are only scraps available, and they are fighting for those scraps. And Johnson was specifically elected to sort of end that notion of scarcity. So he is going to be confronted with exactly that problem as soon as he takes office, at a time where people feel either incorrectly or correctly under threat and sort of, in danger, when these people are coming to Chicago because they've heard that we're a sanctuary city, and they are literally sleeping outside police stations.
But let's also say, in fairness, they're coming to Chicago because the governor of Texas, Greg
Correct.
Abbott, as a political stunt, is putting them on a bus and saying, you're a sanctuary city, you deal with them. Laura, is this going to be the case going forward for the next several days and weeks?
Yes, I think it's been the case even before he started sending the buses here. So even before August, there were groups of migrants coming here by themselves. And that's when we heard of several activists housing them and helping them sort of get on their 2 feet. What happened for a while is that it's word of mouth, right? If they hear that in Chicago, they will get some sort of help to get started, that's kind of how they kept coming. They're no longer just coming on buses. They're coming playing, they're coming on their own, they're meeting people. And I think that there has been even some anger within the asylum seeker community, because some of the people that got here in August have not moved out of some of those shelters. Mm-hmm. So then that puts into question what was the process established at the beginning.
Are the shelters overstretched? We've got all these social service organizations, Catholic charities, immigrant groups. Are they able to pick up all the slack right now?
I don't think so, and I think that there is something that we're not talking about at all, which is the federal immigration policy that has created this crisis. Right? These people don't have a permit to work. So they are paroled in here, and then they're told, when we talk to the cities and city officials, they're being told, well, you're going to stay here until you're able to settle down. But what does that settling down really mean if they don't really have a legal way of settling down per se, right? So then we go back into the whole conversation of then the immigration reform or lack of immigration reform.
And these are asylum seekers, and some local officials have called on loosening those restrictions, getting them the ability to work. Is there any way to do that?
I don't think that the conversation is focused on that at all. I'm very surprised. I think Lightfoot did mention it on Tuesday when she declared a state of emergency and said, you know, we need Washington to do something about it, to address this. But the conversation continues to be about is the border open or not? Do we need more money to create shelter for these people? But not really focus on the policy changing.
And speaking of policy, okay, go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say, my suspicion is that Joe Biden doesn't want to go there. If he were to indeed administratively, as opposed to passing a law, say, okay, all these people are going to work, there would be riots among Republicans. How dare you? Why we got people here who are unemployed? Why aren't you taking care of our people?
But you also have businesses in the service sector that are begging for workers. I mean,
I agree with you, but we're talking politics, not humanity.
Sometimes those two things don't go hand in hand. Heather Sharon, there's also this issue of the state Medicaid program. Last year, the governor signed a law to expand Medicaid to cover certain undocumented residents over the age of 42, I believe, or 46.
Now 42.
So it was going to cost. It was budgeted for about $200 million. It's now projected to cost more than $1 billion. Are they just going to have to pay that? That's going to be a big chunk in the budget.
I think that, you know, we talk about humans here again, and the argument would be how much more money can they spend when they do end up in the ER, right? So I feel like that would be the continuous.
So it'll cost more if you don't pay on the front end.
If you don't pay up the front, right. And so I think that some of the activists and some of the people lobbying for this bill, that's the argument, right, that the cost is projected because a lot of these people are coming into, you know, seeing the doctor for the very first time in a very long time, so they come in with lots of baggage, but eventually the burden will be less.
And why did the cost balloon? Just because there are more people than anticipated?
Yes. So just like the asylum seekers, for example, right now we're talking about 9,000 people, according to official numbers. That's super undercounted, right? We don't even know if the city is keeping track. There's people coming in every single day. It's not like they come in and sign up for anything, right? So the undocumented community historically has been undercounted because they're afraid to come forward and say, we're here undocumented.
Well, however this gets resolved, we know, Phil Thompson, that none of this is Mayor Lightfoot's problem anymore. I think we have some video of her leaving on her final day today, getting feted with the Shannon Rovers and some, there she is, with her wife, Amy Eshelman. She's tried to sort of bookend her legacy this week, saying, you know, the four-letter word she believed in was hope, and, you know, she never gave up hope. What is her legacy as we sit here right now?
I think it's mixed. I think she'll be remembered more for her missteps, for her kind of argumentative public displays of aggression. You know, the whole haircut issue during the pandemic shutdown. But, you know, she did a lot that you can praise her for. You know, the invest in the South and West Sides, for example. You know, trying to get communities of color back on their feet that have been neglected for decades.
There's no doubt about that. I just have to comment on this car. I mean, this is very FDR. This is a very FDR scene. I almost think she needs like one of those cigarette holders.
No, cigar.
Cigar. Yeah. Heather Sharon, as a parting gift, she issued all these executive orders today, something like 11. What's that all about?
Well, it's her attempt, I think, perhaps at the very last minute to shape what she hopes her legacy will be. You know, she declined our interview to talk about her legacy. She did not sit down with the Tribune or the Sun-Times or WBEZ. And I wonder if these executive orders are not sort of a map to what she is most proud of and what she hopes that Brandon Johnson will not undo. The issue is that this is really an unprecedented use of executive order authority by a Chicago mayor. The last executive order issued by Rahm Emanuel was in January of 2019, so it was even before the election. So for her to issue 14 total in the last week, I think, you know, is pretty significant. And I think it shows that she feels like it's not done. She talked this week about how she had planted seeds. If you just plant a seed, it means that that plant has not flowered or grown, and I think this is her attempt to sort of hold Johnson's feet to the fire. I spoke with him briefly this afternoon, and I said, are you going to sort of undo all of those executive orders? And he said that he would review each of them and take them one by one, but that she could do what she can do.
There's nothing keeping him to those executive orders, nothing
With
tying him
the
to
stroke
that.
of the pen, he can undo all of them.
And so Johnson gets ready to take the oath of office on Monday, Greg Hines, and just a few weeks ago we had alder people ostensibly exerting their independence, saying, you know what, we're going to do away with this decades-long practice of the mayor appointing all-important committee chairs. We're going to do it ourselves. All of a sudden today, Brandon Johnson comes out with his selections for committee chairs, and it looks like the alder people are just going to go along with that. How come?
Yeah, fancy that. Because the Chicago aldermen at core like to fall in line. They like to be told what to do. That's just the truth of it. I think more interestingly, it tells us that if the rap on Lori Lightfoot was that she wasn't a politician, she couldn't get along with people, this guy is very much a politician. And this is very much the kind of thing most mayors would do. You know, you don't want to have trouble with your executive branch, with your legislative branch, so you put your own people in charge. You see that in some of his appointments. It's been kind of a careful mix of the chief of staff of the CTU is going to be his chief education advisor, but somebody who worked for Rahm Emanuel and Rich Daley is going to be his chief of staff. It's an interesting mix, like I said, it's the kind of thing you didn't see from Lightfoot.
A lot of constituencies here he's trying to plead. Yeah, Rich Gaitis you're talking about is the chief of staff, who was from the Daley administration and worked under Rahm Emanuel and Lori Lightfoot. When we talk about the alder people that Johnson wants as committee chairs, Heather, and we should mention to our viewers, these jobs are sought out by alder people. They come with jobs for their people and more money to spend, and sometimes these committees rarely ever meet. We don't know what some of these committees do, but there's some strategic picks here, especially for the all-important Finance Committee and the Budget Committee and so on.
That's right. So Alderman Pat Dowell will be the chair of the powerful Finance Committee. She got that position essentially because she stuck her neck out for Brandon Johnson at a time when most people think he did not have a shot in the dark of becoming Chicago's mayor. She replaces Alderman Scott Wagsback, who was a thorn in the side of Rahm Emanuel, but turned into one of Lori Lightfoot's most loyal allies and then did not endorse Johnson and is now in the wilderness. The most powerful alderperson in this new city council will be Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa, who is the dean of the Democratic Socialist Caucus. He will be the zoning committee chair and Mayor Johnson's floor leader, which is an incredible amount of power to consolidate into one pretty young still alderperson, and is one of the most progressive and far left members of the city council.
I should mention there's some picks that were maybe not so obvious. So Alderman Brian Hopkins of the 2nd Ward is going to lead the Public Safety Committee. He was not a Brandon Johnson supporter.
He was prominent Vallis supporter, and I think that is what Greg is talking about with this politician skill that we're seeing from the mayor-elect. He's saying, look, Brian Hopkins, you weren't on my team before, but that doesn't mean that we can't work together and we can help each other, because you, as a downtown alderperson, are very invested in keeping crime as low and under control as possible. So instead of sort of pulling against each other, which Lightfoot chose to do so often, Brian Hopkins and now Brandon Johnson are now pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, he's now in charge of the committee. If it doesn't work, it's your fault.
Yeah.
or also he might not, want to run for mayor in 4 years because he's got this plum committee position. I don't know, but Greg Hines, when Mayor Lightfoot took the oath of office 4 years ago, right away a bunch of symbolic and maybe not symbolic and real executive orders about aldermanic prerogative that never really came true. Are you expecting Brandon Johnson to hit the ground running and sign a bunch of orders and get a lot of things in motion on Monday?
I'm sure there's going to be some symbolic things. He has to please his base, the people that got him there, and I think you'll see some things in that direction, affordable housing, restorative justice, police kinds of changes. But this is going to be a work in progress. We really don't know. He's got to get ready for what could be a very hot summer that's right around the corner with lots of problems. He's got this immigration crisis we just talked about, and then he's got to roll out his first city budget just 3 months from now. So, I mean, that kind of explains why he's carefully picking the people around him. He needs some friends for a while. He needs to pick his foes right now and not take on everybody.
And I think it's important to note that, you know, he only had 41 days to transition into office, you know, pick his team and lay the foundation for his agenda, the shortest transition in Chicago history. So much of the city will still be run by Lightfoot's appointments for at least the next
Like
several
Dr. Allison
months.
Arwadi
Correct.
at the public health department, who he said he wanted to get rid of
Yeah.
because of the mental health clinic issue. By the way, he ran on saying he wants to reopen the mental health clinics. Now maybe backing
No,
off that?
I asked him that directly that today, and he's committed to reopening the public mental health clinics.
Okay, but
on
Arwadi's
the
staying
record.
on board for at least the time being.
Well, so all of these positions require city council confirmation.
Right.
So there's always a
That's a
little
long
bit
process.
of bureaucracy to go through.
Right.
So you can't sort of, you know, show Allison Arwadi the door and then bring in her replacement right away.
We have to get to this tragic shooting of the CPD officer Ariana Preston, whose mother then, after her death, got her graduate degree at Loyola. 4 teenagers taken into custody for murder. I mean, this is kind of an existential question, and sometimes they don't have an answer. But why did this happen? Why are 4 teens just targeting a police officer like this? They're going on a robbery spree, and this officer has to lose her life.
I mean, you can't make sense out of the senseless. I mean, this is not just a problem that pertains to her case, and it's very tragic with her case, but this is a Chicago issue, and this is going to be one of the great issues that faces Brandon Johnson. I mean, part of the reason why he's in office is, you know, people think that he can speak to the youth, that he can reach the youth and help turn this thing around, not just from whoever he appoints as, you know, superintendent, but, you know, getting in the ground and reaching these communities.
Right, and the reports are that she had laid there for something like 30 minutes before there was any response. I mean, is there more to investigate here in terms of?
Yes, the Sun-Times has reported that there's an internal investigation about why it took 30 minutes for an officer to respond to an alert on the city's ShotSpotter system that there had been gunfire in that location. It's not clear why that took so long, but we did hear from Rich Gaitis that it appears that she died almost instantaneously, so that it would not have been possible to save her. However, if you're going to have a ShotSpotter system so that you know where gunshots are going off and you can't
And you don't use it,
to
ShotSpotter,
render aid to an officer,
which a lot of folks
yes.
want to get rid of that system
Yes.
anyway.
If there's a silver lining in this terrible tragedy, it's that these kids were caught because the friend of one of them who got a call from one of the suspects bragging about this immediately reported. That's what this city needs to ultimately get to the root of crime. We've got to have people cooperating with police and not viewing them as an occupying army. If we can do that, we'll be better
That's
off.
a good point. I mean, the folks do not typically cooperate with the police, which is why some of these murders do not get solved. This was very quickly, again, silver lining to a very tragic story here. Silver lining for Blackhawks fans to their horrible season, Phil Thompson. They get the #1 pick, and Connor Bedard, is he the savior of the organization here, as folks are suggesting?
Well, I mean, let's not call him savior yet, because he's 17 years old. He's going to turn 18. You know,
That's a lot on his shoulders.
Yeah, that's a lot on a 17-year-old that, you know, is not from the big city. He's going to have to get adjusted to Chicago, but he's got incredible skills. He's called a generational talent. He could be the next Kane. I've heard him compared to Sidney Crosby. In fact, you know, just talking to a bunch of people in hockey, they just rattle off a bunch of names of Hall of Famers that they see pieces of in this kid. But for the most part, he's a scorer. And at his ceiling, he might, don't all rush me, but he might even be a better scorer than Patrick Kane.
Wow.
Yes.
So that, I mean, that would put him on Mount Rushmore here among hockey players. But is he enough to boost the Blackhawks out of the basement? I mean, they need a lot of help, not just one player.
Well, they got a lot of picks, though. They got 2 first-rounders this year, 2 first-rounders the next 2 seasons, 4 second-rounders this year. And, you know, they already have some pieces in the pipeline. By one measurement, they jumped from like around 25th ranked farm system to 5th.
Wow.
And it's only going to get better with all the sacrifices, you know, goodbye Alex DeBrincat, you know, goodbye Kirby Doc, even Patrick Kane. All of that draft capital is going to come to bear now because Kyle Davidson is going to be able to maneuver and get the picks that he wants. So who knows, in 5 years, when all these kids grow up, you know, you might see a new dynasty. We'll have to see. They have to pan out, though.
Right, right. And speaking of picks panning out, what about the Chicago Bears picks? I mean, they've brought a lot of young talent in.
Yes.
Do you anticipate these picks panning out the way General Manager Ryan Poles wants them to?
Oh, they better, because when you
There's a lot of holes here.
oh my gosh, when you pass on Jalen Carter, the D-tackle for Darnell Wright,
The offensive lineman.
Yeah, the offensive lineman. Now he's a mauler, but
A much less sexy pick here.
very well put. So if you're going to do that, he better pan out, because he's always, for the entirety of his career, is going to be compared to Jalen Carter.
What we should mention is all these off the field issues.
Yes, and that's true. And he came in with some rumors about being out of shape, being overweight. That might speak to his character, to his commitment to football. So, if Darnell Wright is hardcore football, will add some grit to the Bears, on the offensive line, they could really use that.
We'll know right away. Green Bay opening night.
Green Bay opening night.
Well, Green Bay is not the same Green Bay. It's like there's
The
a part
Jordan
of me,
Love era begins. It's the Love Fields era.
Yeah, there's a part of me that if the
Anytime
Bears.
we beat Green Bay is a good day.
Yeah.
I know, but if you're going to beat Green Bay, you're going to beat the Aaron Rodgers Packers.
All right, hold that thought because we are out of time, but we'll continue this over credits. Greg Hines, Heather Sharon, Laura Rodriguez-Preza, and Phil Thompson, thank you all so much for joining us. And that is our show for this Friday night. And for the Week in Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe. And please tune in tonight at 10 for our broadcast. Phil Thompson, the White Sox, 13 games under 500 now? I mean, they'd have to really turn it around to have a chance to recover.
I don't know that they can. I think they're like second from the bottom of the league in ERA. Meanwhile, the Cubs, they're just snake-bitten.
They have great starting pitching, great hitting, but they just can't string together wins.
Runs in scoring position. They can't get them in. But, I think they're going to correct that. If you look at their record, 18-19, their expected win-loss record is 24-13.
Wow.
It shows you just how good they're supposed to be.
What does that mean, though? What is that? Is that like a
if you account
stat
for
that?
Yeah, like it's.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a proud sponsor of diversity, equity, and inclusion-focused free continuing legal education for lawyers throughout the region.